Thank you very much, Secretary General. Now, it gives me pleasure to ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the Honorable Frederick Mitchell, who will speak on behalf of the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And his theme, essentially, vibrant societies delivering on human development and the post-2015 development agenda. I ask my friend, the Honorable Frederick Mitchell, to address us.
You know that I'm in exalted company when Sir George calls me his friend. And thank you and good morning, everyone. To the distinguished platform guests, Prime Ministers, and particularly on this occasion, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and my friend Maxine, the Foreign Minister, and the Secretaries General of the United Nations, the OAS, CARICOM, and the Commonwealth. I know the Prime Minister deeply appreciates the leadership which has been exercised on this question of sustainable development, and in particular the effects on our region. And thank you for your leadership in those areas. I am to apologize for the absence of the Right Honourable Prime Minister from this dialogue. He had every intention of being here, but as he will say himself this afternoon, once he arrives, the best laid plans of mice and men are often delayed by matters of state. He expects to be here for the formal opening this afternoon. In a sense, the reason for his delay in arriving is a case in point to the vulnerabilities of our region and the lessons in resilience. Many of you, when you visited Nassau in February for the opening of the Heads of Government Conference in that month, may have seen the giant hotel project going up next door to that venue. We had plans to open that facility within months of the conference. Instead, the developer was unable to deliver on the promise of the opening, and a bitter set of recriminations began in the public domain about who was at fault. The government felt compelled in the national interest to step into the middle of this dispute, given the fact that some 2,000 young people had been taken on in anticipation of this opening, and the fact that some $3 billion had been invested, $2.6 billion in Chinese capital from its Export-Import Bank, $700 million of the developer's money, and another $100 million from the China Construction Company. In the language of the Americans, this was too big to fail. Yet, despite the good faith efforts of the government and its best endeavors, the developer chose instead to file for bankruptcy of the project in the American courts, where the companies who own the project are registered. This was done without notice and with the developer sitting at the table on the face of it seeking the settlement. As often happens, everyone has now become an expert on what should have been done and what should not have been done. But suffice it to say that the Prime Minister believes that this project has to succeed and is working to ensure that it does. What it raises, however, is more generally the vulnerability of our societies, not only to the shocks of weather and climate, but to the size and singularity of economic projects driven by foreign direct investment and sometimes our own internal investments. When there is a crisis, we have no reserve currencies to be able to have quantitative easing, another expression for printing money to ensure liquidity in the system. These kinds of shocks have resulted in many cases in the high indebtedness that we face today. Think of the various issues or crises in our region. The banker who had plenty to say to our region, who lectured our leaders like they were in school, who was thought by many to be a model investor, a good guy, only to end up in the American jails and leaving the CARICOM country and its citizens holding the bag. Or a housing and mortgage bubble in one of our countries, where because of speculation by private investors, the market collapsed and the CARICOM country had to absorb all of its reserve currency to protect the savings of the citizens of our country, of that country. Or the giant insurance company that stretched its tentacles from the Bahamas to Trinidad and Tobago, paying super excellent returns on investment, only to collapse in a heap, leaving the governments again to hold the bag while the investor walked away into the sunset. This, in our view, shows that notwithstanding all that is said, and whatever the fashion, at the end of the day, governments still have a major role to play in the resilience of our societies and their abilities to adapt to the shocks of and vagaries of the world economy and our natural conditions. It is imperative, then, for our public administrations and our political directorates to be trained and up to the mark, adequately prepared for the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. I was a much younger man when I heard a speech in Miami by the late Errol Barrow, and he, reacting to the election fashions of his time, following the defeat of the Democratic Socialists in the region, excoriated the trend by describing those who looked north for solace and rescue rather than to self-reliance as, quote, groveling mendicants with their caps in their hands. We are too polite in this time to make those kinds of statements, but I think that we get the point that when failure takes place, it is to the governments of the region that our people look to for help, assistance, and rescue. No other entity. It is to the leaders and to the politicians. Our task today is to reassure the region that come what may, our governments, their elected officials, have the intellectual acuity, the intestinal fortitude to help rescue our nations, and I'm confident that we do. The Prime Minister, as you know, is concerned about several themes. One of them is the question of extreme poverty. Just 20 years ago, close to 40% of the population of the developing world lived in extreme poverty. With the advent of the Millennium Development Goals and the galvanized efforts of the international community, extreme poverty has been halved. Recognizing the success of the Millennium Development Goals, especially MDG 1, which calls for the eradication of poverty and hunger, we, the Caribbean community, as participants in those global efforts, are now preparing ourselves for the launch of an ambitious post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda with new targets called Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, the Prime Minister believes in reviewing the topic, vibrant societies, delivering on human development in the post-2015 Development Agenda. The question that now beseeches us is, how does the global community maintain its forward momentum in the benchmarks attained thus far? Goal 1 of the Sustainable Development Regime is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Persons cannot come out of poverty if we as national governments, he says, do not address unemployment, underemployment, and the employability of our citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, too often you may have heard the lament of employers' associations and other business associations that some of the young people and employment seekers do not possess the requisite skills and job readiness. Prime Minister suggests a national training agency would be different from a traditional training places and places of learning that put emphasis on the learning process. Competency-based training places emphasis on learning outcomes and comprises modules of employable skills broken into building blocks. Learning outcomes are based on industry standards, and learning is based on an individual ability and places emphasis on what a person can actually do. These strategies would strengthen relationships between employers, their organizations, and the labor workforce. And also, he believes that work industry training may lead in the long term to a more productive, competent, and service-oriented workforce that can meet the demands of a 21st century marketplace. He believes that national training agencies create opportunities for employers to become engaged in the development of a country's human resources by partnering with the agency in its job training schemes, such as apprenticeship and internship programs and other on-the-job programs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a testament to the strength of a country's national development program when its workforce contains the appropriate competencies and skill sets to be employable beyond its national borders. And we all know the saying, just don't give a man a fish. If you want him to learn and grow, teach him how to fish. Another point to be made on employment refers to the need for societies and in some cases governments to adopt a paradigm shift so that the same level of prestige, value, and regard that is given to academia and white-collar professions is directed toward careers and accomplishments in vocational and non-academic careers. Despite greater attention to technical and vocational education and training in recent years, and clearer understanding and definitions of the skills involved, this type of program unfortunately remains low priority in many countries. CARICOM representatives would recall during the touring the newly established Bahamas Agricultural Marine Science Institute in February 2015 within the margins of the 26th Intersessional Conference in the Bahamas. Additionally, colleague heads, he says, we must remain attuned to the fact that we must always seek to provide the requisite institutional support for entrepreneurship and the growth of small and medium-sized businesses. Entrepreneurship, for example, plays an important role in promoting unique and valuable life skills and career paths. The Bahamas itself is particularly and firmly believes that education is a key factor in building resistance and combating issues and vulnerabilities faced by small states such as climate change and migration. There is a need for the improvement, modernization, and relevance of all aspects of education so that measurable learning outcomes are achieved by all, and so that learning needs of all young people, both boys and girls, are met through appropriate learning and life skill programs. And I know he would want particularly to add his concern about the dysfunctions of young males in the region and the special emphasis that needs to be placed on training for boys and young men, because they are falling behind in all of our societies from north to south. This means in helping in education and life skills, raising the status of the teaching profession through, for example, continued professional development and enhancement of conditions of service, the mobilization of strong national commitment to education for all, and the development of a national plan of action that enhances investment in education. Ladies and gentlemen, our commitment to increasing the human development indices by virtue of the policies we implement is a reflection of our commitment to our people. Our people expect us to match rhetoric with real action. Our people expect us to match pledges with actual provision of resources. And our people expect us to match promises with actual opportunities. He wants me on his behalf to implore colleague heads of government and ladies and gentlemen to not to let down the men and women, and particularly the young people of this region, who turn to us with the hope of attaining a brighter and more secure future tomorrow. They are counting on us, and he believes that we ought to not let them down in the process. I thank you for your attention.